Hi, everybody. Alida Hernandez, Spanglish Entertainment News. Today we have an author, also a health historian. His name is Ronald Gruner, and he has written a book called COVID Wars, America's Struggle Over Public Health and Personal Freedom. This is going to be a very interesting topic. It's going to be a very good conversation talking about COVID in the last 5 years that we went through and explaining more about the reasonings for things that happened and the misinformation that was out there. So let's just get deep dive into this with Ronald Gruner right now. So let's bring him in. So here we are today with health historian and author Ronald Gruner. How are you today?
I'm just fine, thank you. And thank you for the invitation.
Oh, sure. I thought the subject was, of course, appropriate. You just wrote this book called COVID Wars, America's Struggle Over Public Health and Personal Freedom. And I did receive the PDF, so I've been reading it, and a lot of interesting information. I'm not done yet, but um, it was really interesting because I've learned a lot of things, and I think people will learn a lot from your book and maybe help. I don't know if it'll help, to disseminate all this information that we got out there over the last 5 years. So tell me what made you write this book, first of all?
That's a good question. I had written a book, We the Presidents, that was an overview of presidents that came out 3 years ago. And I was thinking about what my next project would be. And the last thing I had on my mind was writing about COVID. I mean, like everybody else, we were just getting through with the COVID pandemic, and we wanted to put that behind us. And I really had no interest in writing a COVID book. But then a number of my friends suggested I really think about that. And the more I thought about it, and then I read incredibly Daniel Defoe's discussion of the London Plague of 1665. 1665. And I read that, which he had taken from the diary of his uncle. And I saw so many similarities between what we went through and what the Londoners went through over 300 years ago. And the other thing that I found interesting was that the Spanish flu in 1918 killed uh, almost 700,000 Americans, far more than World War I. But a book wasn't written about that until 1986, 1976, rather, 76, 60 years later. So I thought, maybe there is an opportunity and a need to write a book about COVID by somebody that lived through it, that would like to write as honestly as possible a document describing the pandemic, both as it affected people individually and also the data about who died, who didn't die. There's so much misinformation about COVID, and there still is. I thought maybe I could contribute something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I'm still very confused about the whole thing. I had COVID a couple of times. Basically my whole household had COVID, including my mother who's 87 now, and they're fine. Thank goodness.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, mother
Yeah,
87, that's, as you know, a very dangerous age.
Yeah, both my aunt is 85 and my mother 87, and they both made it through COVID. They had pneumonia, they had the respiratory, they were in the hospital for about a week.
Oh
And
boy.
it was more struggle for me because I couldn't be there with them, right? They didn't allow you to be in the hospital. And but they survived, thank goodness. They're good now. I think the only thing they have residual from COVID is the sense of smell.
That still hasn't come back. Interesting. Yeah, everybody seems to have somewhat different symptoms afterwards. Thank God. I mean, many people get very serious heart problems after
Yeah.
COVID or long COVID in particular, and that's as you know serious. And I'm glad they didn't get that.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, do I don't with COVID, I don't even know where to go with this. About the vaccines. Well, first, before we go to vaccines, we talked about 1819 Spanish flu. And I know it said like 20 million worldwide that died. And even online, the numbers are off because I looked online, it says 50 to 100 million.
Well, that's the numbers back in that was 100 years ago. They didn't have good statistics
I
then,
was gonna
and
say.
yes, the common statistics that you often see are in the range of 40 to 50 million, and I wanted to. You notice I say over 20 million.
Right.
And so I wanted to be conservative and not throw out these huge numbers because nobody really knows. So I felt I was safe by saying over 20 million.
Yeah, that's true. That's what I was thinking about. 1819. How did they do census? Like how did they, I mean, I think it would be a little difficult to track things the way now we have better resources to track information. People are sick in the hospital, they notate it and you have a statistic, right? So
That's correct. But keep in mind that when the Spanish flu hit, that was 1918, just during the First World War.
mm,
It hit in 1918 as the war was coming to an end, and then it peaked in 19. Well, it really peaked at the end of 1918 as we were still in World War One, and then it was slowing down in 1919. So the world was preoccupied with the war, and so the statistics are the best they had at the time.
wow.
But they know in the United States, almost 700,000 people died, and they're pretty confident of that because we had pretty good record keeping in the States even that early.
Wow. That's unbelievable. So there was there's a note here that you put about President Bush in 2005. He was talking about a major pandemic coming. How did he start talking about that?
That is an excellent question. George Bush deserves a lot of credit, but unfortunately, he wasn't listened to. He was during the summer of 2005. He was on vacation, and one of the books he read on vacation was John Barry's great book called the Great Influenza, which was describing the 1918 influenza. And President Bush was very affected by that book, and I think the reason he was affected by that book was that was just shortly after 9/11,
Um,
in which 3,000 Americans died. That was a horrible, horrible situation. But he realized a pandemic that can come very, very quickly. He used the analogy of a wildfire in a forest, how quickly it can spread. He knew a pandemic could kill far more than 3,000 people, could kill 1 million people. And so he said, we need to do something to try to prepare the country for that. So Congress passed legislation authorizing $7 billion in supplies, masks, personal protection equipment, medical equipment, everything to be on the shelf when, if and when a pandemic would hit, because President Bush believed one would hit sometime in the foreseeable future. But unfortunately, all that equipment got used with the swine flu, Ebola, and other minor viruses. When I say minor, I mean they still killed 100,000 people over the 15 years after Bush passed that legislation in 2005. So when the pandemic hit in 2020, like President Trump said, we pretty much had an empty shelf because Congress refused to approve additional material in 2014, 2015 when it had run out, which was a shame. But Bush anticipated that and should get a lot of credit. Unfortunately, people didn't follow up.
Yeah, and then unfortunately, they don't talk about this stuff on the mainstream media. So, like I never knew about that. So that's why I was
I didn't.
interested.
I didn't either until I wrote the book. And
Look at that.
and that's you have the fact that you raised that as one of the first points is very common. I talked to a lot of people about my book, and that was one thing that amazes many people.
Yeah, that he was being proactive, basically, just in case because of history, because we've had history in the past of these different viruses and flus and stuff like that. So so how does it really compare when you get the regular flu? I mean, some people can die from a regular flu as well. So what do you think about the comparison to, the standard, all there's different varieties of flus now versus COVID?
Well, typically, historically, anywhere from 30 to 70,000 people die of the flu every year, and that's gone on for decades. And the coronavirus is just basically it's a virus just like the flu, a much, much worse form of the flu. And so over 3 years, it killed 1.1 million people in the United States
Yeah.
because it was a much more intensive and much more infectious version of the flu. That's all it was, just a version of the flu, but just much, much worse. And it's essentially, if you look at the virus, it evolved from the Spanish flu in 1918, which evolved from flus earlier than that. So these viruses are just in the population, changing and evolving over time.
And I was reading in your book that it was what was it, like a bacteria that was more of like a airborne. I forgot what you were talking about. Let me see what.
No, you're right. Initially, we thought, the this hit so quickly in 2020. The scientists and the virologists thought it was spread on surfaces. There was a virus that would be on
Oh,
surfaces, doorknobs, and that's why for the first 6 months they advised you to wash your hands and do all this stuff. And they didn't realize it was airborne, which is far more dangerous. Okay,
oh,
because airborne is in it's in the air, and so they realized it was airborne. I don't know, somewhere around April or May, maybe earlier, 2020, and that's when they realized how dangerous it actually was. And
whoa.
it
Good.
caught people by surprise because in April of 2020, at the beginning of April in the United States, only, as I recall, less than 1,000 people had died of COVID in the United States. By the end of April, 60,000 had. From basically 1,000 to 60,000 in 1 month. That's more people than we lost in Vietnam in
In
one
one
month.
month.
In 1 month.
And what was the cause of that?
That was COVID.
I know, but I'm saying in 1 month, like we were locked down till what, March?
No, we were
What
locked
did they-
down. Well, depending on when you stopped, we were locked down until the end of May to June timeframe. And some
Okay,
states opened up sooner, some states opened up later, but the lockdowns were largely off by the middle of the year. And
right,
then they came back on as the next strain came through.
right.
Okay,
And, and then
but
in
it
Florida,
caught
we
everybody
stayed
by
open.
surprise.
Yeah, and in Florida, we were one of the first states that kind of reopened, right?
That's correct.
So, and I know everybody was panicked. There was such pandemonium in the streets. The first time that my husband and I went to the store, he was wrapped up. You couldn't see. All you saw was his eyes. He was like wrapped up with a towel.
Well, that was kind of no
Because
offense
and
to
we
you.
had gloves on, and we are like, "Don't talk to anybody. Don't touch me." We're
Yeah,
like,
yeah. And nobody knew what to do. People,
no, no, nobody knew. And the interesting part about this is my interaction with it is in December, right? Before in 2019, a good girlfriend of mine was very, very ill and nobody knew what she had. And we found out later she had COVID, but they didn't know it was COVID, right? She had upper respiratory. I mean, she was almost died. She was so bad. She had upper respiratory. We couldn't see her. She stayed quarantined in her house because the doctors didn't know. And it took her about a month and a half to actually get back to work.
I didn't realize
Yeah.
that she had an early version of that, and she
Early
was lucky
version. Yeah, she
because
was.
many of those people that got it early in the pandemic died because they had no idea how to treat it.
Wow. Well, she
You
went to the
know,
emergency room twice. She stayed in the hospital. They were treating like pneumonia. They couldn't figure out. She could say, I have some upper respiratory. They don't know what it is. And
yeah.
then later on, we figured out after COVID came out that we knew that's what she had.
Oh
And
boy, that's
yeah, and then the other thing is in January of 2020, we were in the hospital because my husband's cousin was very ill. He was dying, and we were in the hospital the day Kobe Bryant got killed. The plane
yeah.
that same day we were at the hospital. That was the day his cousin passed, and we were a hospital. The waiting room, there was like 50 people in there. We were all in there. It was,
Oh my Lord.
and nobody got sick for months and months and months. I didn't get sick till December. So nobody in that, which was interesting because we were in the hospital, which is the worst setting to be in, right? You know
Well, in
what I
some
mean?
respects, yeah, in some respects it is. In other respects, hopefully it's not. But yeah, I mean, many people got COVID later on, but I was fully vaccinated, but I got a mild case of COVID in 2022. But you have to realize that this virus was evolving and changing all the time, and the virus and the vaccines would only catch a limited strain. And when it changed, you could get it. But I got a very mild case.
Oh,
That was just like a bad case of a cold or a mild case of the flu for 3 or 4 days.
yeah, yeah. When I got it, I didn't get vaccinated. I got it. I was sick for maybe 5 days.
Yeah.
Like 2 or 3 days that I was very bad. Like I couldn't focus. I had the brain fog was completely like took over. I couldn't look at a whew, close. So I didn't know, I had weird body pains. It was the strangest thing. I had my thighs is the only place that hurt. My thighs hurt really bad and my lower back. It was like the weirdest like pains. Like why would I have pains there? I have no idea why. And
COVID struck people in all kinds of different ways. You're right about that.
yeah, and everybody I know that's had it, a mixture of people who are vaccinated, unvaccinated. So I have a mixture of both. And it all depends. Like my husband got it, he was sick for 2 days and that was it. So his immune
Yeah.
must have been really, really good. And you know, like I said, my mother and my aunt got it the worst because of their age, but they fared good, thank God, you know.
Well, I think I can say with some confidence your family has very strong genes, okay? Because you've had it a lot, but you've avoided it. I know some people that had worse experiences, as I'm sure you do
Oh
too.
yeah. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that pass, and
Yeah.
wishing, blessings to all those families out there that lost loved ones. I had a cousin by marriage that was living in New York, and he had cancer. And unfortunately, he got COVID and he passed away. And it was
Oh, boy.
really, really sad because his wife just had twins.
What part of what year was that?
That was the beginning in
The,
2020.
the very beginning?
Yeah, and then my former mother-in-law died in the nursing home in New York in
Oh,
2020. And
yeah.
that was really sad because nobody could go there. She was alone. It was just very painful for the family. They didn't get the body till I don't know when to do a funeral because they wouldn't let the body go, which I don't understand, you know. It was just really, really bad. And New York was really bad when it came to the nursing homes and the lockdowns. I have a lot of stories about people that lived there.
Yeah. Well,
So,
that's hopefully we'll learn from that. Hopefully we won't see a pandemic like this for
oh,
many, many years, perhaps never, if our medicine continues improving and we can prevent that.
right.
Polio used to be a very common, or relatively common disease, and we pretty much have beat polio, and hopefully we
Yeah.
can beat these bad flus. That's all it is, a bad flu.
Yeah. I think it's more of how can we get true information to people. That's the whole point. I think that's what is true and stop this misinformation because that's what confuses people, right? You're looking at the news and they're saying one thing and then somebody else says something else. So you don't know what's true. And I suffered from that, not knowing, people, I just not one for vaccines. I mean, I got vaccines when I was a child, and I got the whatever that booster thing that you have the little mark on your arm. I
I
forgot what that
remember
was.
that.
I
Yeah,
don't know
I
what
had
that
that.
was.
And that's the measles, mumps, and rubella. So that's the
Oh,
that's the measles vaccine.
oh, that's
You
the
have to,
measles? Oh,
yeah, and that causes a tiny little scar on your arm.
yep, yep. So I think
Well, that may
everybody
be the smallpox. I beg your pardon. That's probably the smallpox
maybe
vaccine.
small. Yeah,
That's the smallpox.
only
Yeah,
certain people, like if you, I guess you were born in the 60s or whatever, from then
yeah.
on, you have that little, I still have the mark on my arm. And I mean, we were raised that as a child, we had to get vaccines to prevent certain major illnesses. I personally believe now, sometimes I think we're getting so many vaccines that it gets to a point of like, what are we doing? Am I supposed to take 5 vaccines a year? Like, why? You know?
Well, there's a lot of concern about vaccines, and that's being discussed, and hopefully we'll get to the truth. I will say this in all my research, and I spent 2.5 years writing the book, and I tried, as you know, looking at the book. It's well documented. People
Yes.
that want to question the data can do their own research and say this is good or bad data by looking at the sources. But
Mhm.
vaccines definitely saved a lot of lives during COVID. If you look at states or counties or even cities, and look at the ones which are highly vaccinated versus the ones that are not vaccinated or have low vaccination rates, the death rates vary tremendously in the areas, whether state or city, that were highly vaccinated in general had much lower death rates than the areas that were not highly vaccinated.
So do you feel that we had more deaths here in Florida? Because there was a lot of people here that I know of that because we were open more and some people didn't get vaccines like I did, and none of my family did. None of us did. Nobody in the house had vaccines.
I have to look. I don't remember where Florida is exactly. In terms of death rates, compensating now for age, because Florida has a relatively older population,
That's
but
true.
not as old as people think. I mean, the oldest population is in Maine.
Oh,
Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont. Those northern New England states have an older population on average than Florida by several years.
wow.
But in any case, and that's by the way, you can find that data in my book. As you know, in the appendix, there's data for every
Yeah.
single state that has
Mhm.
average age and all that. Um, but I think in terms of if you adjust for age compensated death rates, Florida was just slightly below average, but they weren't horrible by any means. They were kind of a middle of the road in terms of death rates.
Oh, okay. Okay. Let's see. Um, so what about I know we talked about we can talk about conspiracy theories. So let's talk about COVID, the origin of COVID. that people had said it came from Wuhan, China, because that's where the first reported of COVID was, correct?
That's correct. Well, there's no question. It first arose in Wuhan, China, which, you know, before COVID, we had never heard of. Most Americans had never heard of that. But it's actually a city of 11 million people. It's a huge city, and it's kind of a crossroads for airlines and roads and railroads in China. So it's a major city. Uh, but here's the interesting thing about that is that in Wuhan, at the time in 2019, when COVID first was identified. Uh, the most secure virology or biology lab for research was located in Wuhan, China. It was a security level of 4, the highest level in China, and there was only one in China.
Mm.
But in China, there are almost 15,000 wet markets. Now, a wet market is something
Oh,
we don't have in the United States. A wet
yeah.
market is where they say they sell raw meat and they sell even live animals, which they slaughter in front of the customer, so the customer knows it's fresh. And
Yeah.
that's something foreign to a Western taste, and all kinds of animals that we would typically not eat. So there's 15,000 in China. The probability of the virus arising in a wet market that happens to be in the same city and on only one city in the whole country is vanishingly small, in my opinion.
Mm.
So the chance is like 1 in 15,000 that that wet market, 7 miles from the laboratory, it came from the wet market with no connection to the laboratory, just seems hard to understand. But that said, there's been a lot of research done, and there's no hard evidence it did come from the laboratory. That may arise later on.
Oh, okay.
Um, I don't want to make accusations, but perhaps China covered it up. We don't know. But
Yeah.
right now, we don't know for sure. But statistically, it would point towards the laboratory. But I mean that just statistically. There's no
Okay.
proof.
Right, right. Because I know they, like you said, they do the live animals and they eat weird things. We don't eat certain animals they eat.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I won't even mention the kinds of
no,
animals. But of
I don't even
course,
want to know.
of course, they think, when we have a big piece of roast beef on a plate, big slab of beef, they think that's really disgusting too. So it's two perspectives.
I know. I guess it's what you're used to eating,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But how do you believe um how do you believe the children were affected by this? Because that's a big deal. The children were locked down, they were forced to wear masks at 5 years old, and there's a lot of controversy about that, a lot of talk about that.
Well, they were locked down. They were one of the reasons they were locked down. They were concerned that the children would pick up the virus, and they may not be affected by that, but they would bring that home to their parents and grandparents. That was one of the motivations for doing that. But although the death rate for people young, say 16 years and younger, was very low, still almost 2,000 individuals under 16 years old did die of COVID. I mean, it was a small number compared to everybody, but it was still 2,000, almost 2,000 deaths. So that was a factor.
Yeah.
But should we have locked down schools so tightly? I think in retrospect, probably not at this stage, that we've learned from that. But the other point I'd make, I think that's interesting, you can read about in my book, is if you look at the dropout rates in schools and the decline in test scores uh, uh, 2 years into the pandemic, that wasn't strongly affected by what states opened up schools and what states closed schools. So in my book, I give a number of examples. I just give 2 examples now, Wyoming and Connecticut. Wyoming was a very open state. They never closed anything down. The schools stayed open the entire pandemic. Connecticut was just the opposite. That was a much more uh, they closed many things down. They stayed down longer, and states like Massachusetts even more so. But the difference in test scores and dropout rates between those two states, just as an example, Wyoming and Connecticut, were almost similar, very similar. But both states had dropout rates of about 1.5 to 2%. So most of the dropout rates and most of the decline in test scores wasn't the school policies, it was COVID itself,
Okay.
affecting people, affecting attitudes, affecting teachers. I don't know what the effects were, but it was the fact that COVID was in the town, in the city, was what affected so many people, whether the schools were open or closed.
Okay. So it didn't matter. It was just COVID. Yeah, and I think everybody got affected differently. I know I was a little depressed because I do public relations, right? So I interview people, and when the lockdown hit, I looked at my phone and I'm like, I don't have one email. Like I
Yeah.
had no emails for 3 months. I had
Oh
no
my
emails for
Lord.
like nothing, like nothing. Like I go, can you call my phone and say, is it still working? You know, like
Yeah.
somebody called me like, because I couldn't believe it. I mean, I get thousands of emails a day, right? So for me not receive anything, it was really strange.
That is strange.
And then my husband is a performer. He's a salsa artist. So no performances, no music outside. So all our musicians, everybody was calling each other. What are we going to do? Nobody was working. Nobody was any earning income. The ones were only musicians. So it was really, I think everybody affected differently depending on what you do in your life. So for us, it was traumatic because we were always in with people all the time, events
Yeah.
and all this stuff. Everything just stopped. It's
Yeah.
like the whole world just stopped.
It was unbelievable how quickly it happened too, and
It
how many
is.
people were affected.
And 5 years
It
now.
was
Whew.
very difficult. It's hard to believe it's been 5 years, isn't it?
Now, yeah, it seems like it just happened yesterday almost.
Yeah, today is a day that the World Health Organization declared an international emergency on March 11th, 2020. And then 2 days later, on March 13th, President Trump declared a national emergency.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's
Exactly
five,
now.
yeah, it's 5 years to exactly now.
Wow, that's incredible. That's been that long. And so let's see. We had a lot of increase in deaths of non-COVID deaths, you said here, cardiac and cancer. And then from drug and alcohol as well, even accidents you were talking about. Um, I was going to get a question from that. So my question is, there was the big thing on the internet talking about people who had the vaccine, COVID vaccine, and then later on people suffering from myocardia and
Myocarditis and pericarditis,
myocarditis, and
that is
then
correct.
right.
That
So
is correct.
where was that coming from?
Well, there's two time frames to look at. The
Okay.
first time frame to look at is 2020, before vaccines. The second time frame to look at is 2021 and 2022.
Okay.
So in 2021 and 2020, before vaccines, the myocarditis deaths increased, jumped up like 100 more than the long-term trend. By the trend, I'm saying what I did in my book in analyzing all these deaths, as I looked at the trend typically from 2009 to 2019
Okay.
and extrapolated that trend out.
Right.
And in most of those cases, let me just take the US deaths, that increased year by year, very, very steadily, roughly about 1 to 1.5% every year. And then it jumped up in 2020, total deaths for almost 450,000 more than expected. Now,
Wow.
when you look at cardiac deaths, that jumped up. I don't recall the exact number, but it jumped up, significantly. I'm going to just estimate what that was. That was probably about 20,000 deaths more than expected in 2020.
Wow.
Okay, in that range. I may be wrong about that. I don't have my data in front of me.
Right, right,
Uh,
right.
but then when vaccines came in 21, it declined significantly. So most of those deaths from cardiac deaths were related to COVID itself.
Oh, okay.
COVID had many effects on the body. People died of pneumonia when they got COVID because
Yeah.
pneumonia set into their lungs. The virus also affected the heart in bad ways, as did the vaccine at times, causing myocarditis. My estimate was in 2020, the number of youths that were under 24 years old but that died because of COVID and myocarditis was about 100 more than in the normal rate. In
Okay.
2021, after vaccines came in, that rate actually dropped. It decreased.
Hmm.
So it's hard to sort out what affected the vaccines have and what affected COVID have. But most of those deaths occurred, I mean, on an annual basis in 2020 when it first started. Now, cancer deaths are a different situation. I think part of what happened there was that when the whole country was locked down, people that might have had symptoms that they suspected, I've got abdominal pain, for example, or something like that, they didn't go to the doctor. And so those cancers spread further and became more dangerous
Mm.
because they weren't getting the proper care. And that's one of the reasons I think we saw deaths, for example, like cancer and
Right,
other renal deaths,
right, right.
kidney failure, because they weren't getting diagnosed and corrected during the early stages of the pandemic.
Because everybody was so concerned about COVID, right? That they forgot about all their stuff like heart disease, like diabetes, like what you're saying. There was other things going on in people's health.
That's correct. And also the hospitals were swamped and you couldn't get appointments and things of that nature.
Yeah, exactly. And then even the staffing, everybody was panicked. I think everybody was just panicked. Nurses, doctors. I remember trying to go. I took my mother and my aunt to the doctor, months later after COVID, where everything was open already. But people here, were still wearing the mask, and they would like scream at you to walk in. You gotta put your mask on. Ah! They're like, stop, panic, don't
Yeah.
panic.
But if you look, it was a terrible time. But if you look in my book, there's a chart that shows, deaths climbing steadily in the United States from 2009 to 2019, then a large increase up in 2020. And then it declines, what we call excess deaths. Well, those are really the increase over expected deaths.
Right.
And so the largest jump in unexpected deaths was in 2020, and then that went down in 21 and 22.
Oh, okay. See, I thought basically that we had like increase instead of decreasing, you know what I mean?
Well, it increased, what we call excess deaths beyond the expected level. They increased in all 3 years, but the amount of increase, the size of the increase was the largest in 2020. And then it went down as we were able to manage it better.
Okay. So do you believe that we had different boosters and vaccines that came out? Like they had one and then another one and another one. Do you think those helped certain people to really fight off the COVID?
Yes, all of my analysis says they did help people, but you have to keep in mind that virus was a moving target.
Mm.
It's a moving target, just like the virus in February of 2020. It had evolved from the Spanish flu 100 years before that. That virus was evolving during the pandemic, and the vaccines were kind of like rifle shots. They weren't like shotgun shots.
Okay.
They were like rifle shots for a particular strain of the virus. As that virus evolved, and it went through like 5 major iterations during the pandemic.
Oh,
Okay, 5 changes, and the vaccines had to be changed to keep up with it. And so that was a problem with the vaccines. They could not keep up with the changes in the virus. The virus is changing faster than the vaccines.
wow. And then I know that Trump did the what was it, warp speed to get the
Yes, Operation Warp Speed.
Operation Warp Speed. Now, usually it takes how many years to really develop a vaccine?
Well, I would say 90% of the time it takes several years. But the Operation Warp Speed was not the fastest developed vaccine. The Asian flu vaccine, believe it or not, in the 1950s, and this is in my book, was developed in about 4 months. It was a well, I won't say a panic, but it was a high priority operation. It was developed starting in April, and in August, President Eisenhower was the first one to get vaccinated. So he was one of the first Americans to be vaccinated in the United States, and I believe that was on television in 1957. So that was developed in record times. But other vaccines, like, for example, the HIV vaccine, they've been working on that for 30 years, and they still haven't got it. So Operation Warp Speed was developed in very record time compared to most other vaccines. That's true.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's so much information. I mean, I think it would be good for people to read your book because I haven't read, like I said, I haven't read the whole thing, but I was stuck to it. I was reading and reading, and it's very detailed. So it has very specific, health words in there, things that you can do so you can understand more what's happening. But a lot of the problem we had was all the misinformation. Okay. Till today. Okay. Of the vaccine that was too fast. How could they do it so fast? It's not working. The boosters, I mean, just so much. We had the 5G towers is giving us cancer, or I forgot what else. There was a whole bunch of stuff that came out, right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we're suffering from a flood of information. Information is available from everywhere. It's available from, cable pundits. It's available from the internet. It's available from the federal government. So there was a huge amount of confusion about it because everybody had an opinion, and people that had opinions that weren't medical personnel were offering their opinions so commonly. What I said during the pandemic and what I say in my book a number of times is, I understand if you're skeptical about what you're hearing. I understand that because there's so many sources of information. But my recommendation is if you want to know what's happening, go to our major medical institutions. We're blessed in the United States. We have some of the best medical institutions in the world. We have the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. We have Massachusetts General in Boston. We have Stanford in San Francisco. We have Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland. We have 6 or 7 great hospitals in Texas, for example. And go to their websites or investigate what they're saying about a disease, about COVID or about vaccines, or if something, God forbid, happens in the near future. Get your opinion from those people. They don't have an axe to grind. If you don't trust the government, I understand that. But go see the medical institutions. They're private. They have no axe to grind. Don't listen to your favorite cable pundit.
Yeah, I know. And you know what it is? We live in an age of too much information, right?
That may be true.
Because if
Yes.
you think about it, I just turned 60. So I grew up in an age we had no cell phones, right? We didn't have internet. We did everything. You went to the library, you looked up your research. I remember I was going to school. I would have to go to the library and I would get like a little paragraph. I had to write a whole essay on it, because that's all I could find, right? But
Yeah.
now we have the age of internet, the unlimited amounts of information. So you have to disseminate the information. I tell people all the time, you can't just go to whatever Joey Smith over there that all of a sudden he's a doctor now. No, he's not a doctor, but he thinks he's a doctor, right?
Yeah, that's
Versus
correct.
people who have expertise in the field.
Well, you're 100% correct. And that's, the wealth of information we have is both good and bad. I never could have written my book 20 years ago because, as you see, my book has many, many
Yeah.
sources, both, it's just many, many sources. And you can do that research online now and do it very, very quickly and then confirm that data. For example, what I did was I got data from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and
Right.
Prevention. Now, I knew writing my book, many people did not trust that data. I understood that. So what I did, I recognized that data came from the state, and the state got it from over 3,000 county health bureaus around the country, county health bureaus. So I contacted about a dozen of those and verified that the information that they had matched what the CDC was providing. So that was valid information. So
Okay.
the internet is a blessing for people that want to do research, but at the same time, you can go in some very strange, deep, dark holes
Yeah.
that provide all kinds of weird information about, Pizzagate's an example with the QAnon
Oh my God.
theory.
Yeah.
That there are people at a pizza parlor, pedophiles and all that stuff. So some weird stuff going on.
There's a
You have to
lot
be
of weird
careful.
stuff. There's a lot of weird stuff. I've gone through the rabbit hole, okay, from people giving me information. I'm like, what are you talking about? And still till today, I still some stuff information I really don't know. Like I have to
Yeah.
keep looking it up because I don't get it.
Well, here's one thing we can all do. We have to be aware of what people call confirmation bias. So we all have opinions, and you have to be careful not just to go to sources that confirm what you believe, because that's very comfortable. I believe X, Y, Z. I'm going to go listen to people that say X, Y, Z. That's very comfortable. You have to basically go to areas that disagree with you and at least listen to it with an open mind. And that's why I
Exactly.
think that's the responsibility we have as Americans.
Yeah, you have to do your own research. I guess it's just like I said, everybody has a change of mind. Like somebody puts a perspective out there and everybody gravitates to that perspective and then it just flowers, right? It just keeps blooming from there and
Yeah,
it gets legs, it gets arms, and it just develops from there.
goes viral very quickly.
Literally viral, right? And that's the,
Yeah.
the whole thing. Again, we have all the information, all the tools right now to look up stuff. Like I research all the time. And even that, it's hard. Like you have to, like you said, you have to disseminate. You have to go from one expert to the other. And you have to even be careful with doctors. There's a I don't want to mention his name, but I think you mentioned it. I think you mentioned him, but there's a doctor out there that talks about a lot of things, a lot of the conspiracy stuff side. And he adds fire to the fuel, right? And or fuel to the fire, and then it causes more people to panic, you know.
Yeah. I
And
think I know who you're referring to. He
yeah,
happens to live in Florida,
oh yeah,
at least one that lives in Florida. I understand.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I try to look at different doctors online because there are some incredible doctors online that help you understand your body better. Because I'm personally for more a natural. I use Chinese herbs and I use acupuncture, and it worked for me. And it's I had a stroke 8 years ago. So when I had the stroke, I only went to a Chinese doctor, took the herbs, drank the teas, and I completely, as you can see, I'm fine. I got regained all my strength on my left side, and I'm good, you know.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
Wonderful. That's
So,
wonderful.
so I always tell people you have to have an open mind. You have to think of, like Chinese medicine has been around for 5,000 years. So it's not like it just started the other day. So I tell people you might not be used to it, but it does help, for certain things. And the same thing we have medical doctors here and we have different medicine here.
No, you're right. And, Chinese medicine has been around for 5,000 years or something like that. And so much of it must work, but there's some things perhaps Chinese medicine can't cure, for example,
Exactly.
perhaps like a bad cancer. If you've got cancer, I mean, that's going to take something. You got to either cut it out or find some kind of strong drug to kill it because it's just different from other things that Chinese medicine can cure.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you believe that there's many millions of people in the United States take medicine, okay? And a lot of them take there's a and I see a pattern. There's a pattern of certain medicines that are given, and the reason I say that is because my mother and my aunt go to the doctor and they get medication. And when I went to the pharmacy, the man next to me, he was getting actually the same amount, the same pills that my aunt was getting because I could hear him talking. And I'm like, why are they prescribing the cholesterol medicine, the high blood pressure medicine, and what was the other one? I know high blood pressure and the cholesterol medicine were one of the two big ones. Do you believe any medications that people take had anything to do with their reaction to COVID or maybe the way if they got sick or not? Do you think any of that had anything to do with it?
In all my analysis, I didn't see any evidence of that. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. I just didn't see it.
Yeah.
I personally try to minimize my medicines. I'm unfortunately, well, fortunately, let's look at the positive side, 76, 77 years old. And I tend to forget at this point in my life. And I try to minimize the amount of prescriptions I take, but I do take several, which a doctor recommends. And I take that, but I try to minimize that. I try to eat healthy. I try to exercise and do
Right.
things like that. And at my age, I've seen, unfortunately, people pass away, and sometimes people that do all kinds of things to stay healthy, sometimes it has no effect. So you have to just live your life, and things are going to happen. Sometimes you don't have control over it.
Exactly, exactly. We don't know what our expiration date is, so.
No, we don't. Sure don't.
But and I know I'm fortunate that my mother's still around at 87 and she's still active. She walks every day. Every day she goes outside to walk like 5 times a day. She walks up and down the street.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's good. I mean, I live in Naples in a golf community, and
Mhm.
I'm a horrible golfer, by the way. So that's one reason I write books. I can't play golf, but I mean, I know a number of friends and acquaintances here in Naples that are in their early to mid 80s that play a great game of golf. They're playing their score is their age, which is a great thing. So they're shooting like an 85 at 85 years old, or 83 at 83 years old, which is remarkable.
Well, I can't
I'm
play
gonna have to
golf.
live. I'm gonna have to live to 120 to shoot my age.
Oh, I can't play at all, so forget it. I can't even do
Yeah, it's a fun sport. You can't take it seriously. You got to just enjoy it.
that. Exactly. I think like with everything else in life, you have to take it, just laugh and have a good time and enjoy entertainment, you know. But let's see. Did I miss anything? Do you want to add any more information? I don't know what else. There's so much stuff going out around. We talked about conspiracy theories. We talked about Trump, Bush. Um, what do you think? What do you think we've learned from this? So have we learned from this pandemic?
Well, that's an excellent question, and well, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, to try to summarize what happened and summarize some of the lessons. But I think that if I were to give people one thing to think about is, if, God forbid, when the next pandemic happens, the best sources to go to, I think, are our top medical institutions. I think it's really pretty simple. Uh, I mean, if you get really sick, if you get cancer, if you get really very sick, you're going to go to the best hospital you can find.
Yeah.
And I would recommend the same thing. If you don't trust the government, I understand that. Don't listen to the government. Go to the best hospital. See what the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic are posting on their websites for advice, because they do that all through the pandemic. They did that. And unless you believe all the top hospitals are in cahoots together for some reason in some great conspiracy, that's your best source of medical information. If I would leave people with one thought, that would be it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the medical institutions are there for a reason. And like I said, like you said, any major problems you have, you go to the hospital.
And you find the best hospital you can, and
Yep.
that's where COVID was just as bad as finding out one morning, God forbid, you've got cancer, and at that point, 99% of people are going to go find a good cancer doctor, as opposed to listening to somebody unidentified source.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So, do you think that we'll ever go through? Well, you said we might go through another pandemic, but probably it would be not in our lifetime. And
Well, we can't say. I mean, it took us. We've had small pandemics, flu pandemics, roughly every 20 years in the United States. In 1950, 1970, and even 15 years ago, they would kill 100,000 people in that range. That's horrible, but it's not 1 million or 2 million. I think it's evolving, but medicine's evolving too. And although people are skeptical, many people are skeptical of these new genetic-based or cell-based vaccines. They have a remarkable opportunity for even curing cancer, because everything like cancer is at the cell level. It's not a bacteria. The cells go crazy. Yeah. Something's wrong with the cells. Yeah. And if you can stop that from happening, then you can stop things like cancer. And if you can stop cancer, you can probably stop a virus. So with a very possibly, we can beat things like the coronavirus, that we'll never have a major pandemic again. Medicine's moving quickly.
Yeah, I think they had to even move quicker now because of this. There probably was like panic mode, like we got to do something or start researching. So we don't see the behind the scenes. So there must be labs out there in the United States, researchers that are daily just doing their homework in the biology lab.
Oh, that's true. I mean, I spent 40 years in Massachusetts in the computer business, as you mentioned, and Cambridge, Massachusetts used to be, when I first came to Massachusetts decades ago, it was all computers. Cambridge, it was all computer research and data and that type of thing. Now it's all drugs.
Wow.
Okay, researching drugs and biotechnology. So Cambridge is full of huge buildings of biotechnology firms, like Moderna, for example, which developed one of the mRNA vaccines. So there's a huge amount of research going on in drugs and biotechnology.
Well,
just in Boston alone, huge change. It used to be computers, now it's biotechnology.
Yeah, MIT is up there.
MIT is up there, and a lot of great hospitals and a lot of other schools.
Yeah, I was a technology major before PCs came out. I started taking data processing back in New York, and I used to go to I went to the community college on Chambers Street in Manhattan.
Okay.
Right by the towers. It used to be right by the towers. So I remember going through the towers and going over there. So
I remember going in the towers myself and having dinner in that restaurant at the very top.
It's just I even till now, talking about 9/11 is still so hurtful, especially I knew many people. I knew people that passed that were in the building. I knew people, around, firemen, living that I was born and raised in New York. So it was a very difficult time. And we hope we never have to go through something like that, or an attack on our country,
It was horrible.
It was horrible. Yeah. But yeah, interesting how we, in the last, I want to say 30, let me see, I'm 60, no, 40 years. Been over 40 years now since we first came out with the first PC in 1982. But that's when I started working with computers, when the first PCs came out, and I had an opportunity, and I liked computers. And so it's unbelievable in the last 40 years, the development we have with, like we're talking right now. When do we ever think, right? Like the Jetsons. Remember the Jetsons?
Oh, of course I do.
The Jetsons had their first Zoom. You know that, right? They did their first Zoom on the Jetsons. They had their first cell phone and their first robot.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I started, my first company was in 1969, a company called Data General in the Boston area. And they were in business from really 1969 until they were acquired by EMC in, I believe, 1994. And if you add up all the memory that was stored in those computers during that whole time, in that whole time, it was less than what's on this phone.
I know.
One company, almost 30 years, less memory than on one cell phone.
I know. I remember when you had 8 MB of RAM.
Yeah.
Eight.
And that was a lot. That was a
And that
lot in
was a
those
lot.
days.
And if you got 16, woohoo, I got 16. I go a little faster. You can hear the engine on the hard drive moving.
Yeah.
The
Well, when I
hard drive,
started,
the hard drives were like this big. And now your phone has a hard drive that's like a little tiny chip, like a grain of rice.
yeah, smaller than a grain of rice. It's amazing. So we
Yeah.
don't know. And now with the artificial intelligence coming along, doing research in biotechnology, plowing through all that, just think of all the data we've got, and it can plow through that and find do analysis. I think if we can control that technology and not let it run away from us, it's
Yeah.
going to uh, be miraculous, I hope, for
Yeah,
mankind.
that's a whole another conspiracy theory, right? With the AI, everybody thinks AI is going to come out of your computer and take over your house or something. It's not quite like that.
Well, it is amazing, though. I know you're out of time, but I give you just one quick example.
Sure.
You didn't mention it, but my first book was We the Presidents as a Presidential History, going back 100 years. And that book is 650 pages long.
Hmm.
And so I took the PDF file, the data file for that, and I gave it to Chat GPT with the instruction, the very simple instruction, please review the attached book and write a book review, a 500-word book review in the style of the Wall Street Journal.
And it did.
30 seconds later, it gave me a beautiful book review. It was astonishing. It read through that file, understood what it was reading, and then pulled out the key points and write a very cogent book review that you'd have a hard time mistaking, not mistaking for a book review in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
It is coming along very quickly.
But now AI is basically driven by man inputting information to a computer and then it has like a huge encyclopedia, right?
Well, maybe not. Let's just take X-rays and radiology. I mean, that's going to get. I'm afraid for people, it's going to replace that. So you got millions and millions of X-rays that have been generated over the years, and so you can feed those images like I fed my book into
Oh,
artificial intelligence. It looks at all those images. Let's just take pancreatic cancer, for example.
wow.
So you feed 20 million images of people's pancreas, and then you tell it which ones got cancer and which ones didn't. There'll be trends in that people can't recognize because they're only looking at 100 or 200 images for a trend as opposed to 200 million, and it can spot things that we can't spot.
It's too much to even
Yeah,
comprehend. It really is too much to
it's
comprehend. How does it know? Like how does it just know?
yeah.
But well, Ronald, thank you so much. This has been really informative, and I hope everybody gets your book. I will put the link to COVID Wars, American Struggle Over Public Health and Personal Freedom. And just do your own research too. So, but good research. That's why I always tell people you have to get credible research. You want medical, you have to go to medical institutions. I know that there's been a lot of things that even people didn't even believe the CDC. So it has to stop at some point. It has to stop.
And if you don't believe in the CDC, like I said, go to your local public health bureau and check their data. And there's over 3,000 in the United States. And just to summarize on my book, it's available in all bookstores. If they don't have it in a bookstore, ask them to order it. You'll get it in 3 or 4 days. And of course, it's online everywhere on Amazon, Barnes and Noble online, Amazon, Apple online. So it's available everywhere. COVID Wars.
That's great. So everybody got that. Just go to Amazon or any platform that you like that they sell books, and you can get your COVID Words book. And also look up his other book about the presidents. I have to look up that one now too. The big interesting story, history. I think we need to learn more history. I think we are a society that we just take bits and pieces of things and we don't really know the whole picture. So we start presuming and making opinions of stuff we don't even know what we're talking about.
Well,
You know?
that's yeah.
So get reading. We got lots of books to review, so get reading. So thank you, Ronald, so much for your time and all this information, and we look forward to any other book you're going to write.
Well, that may be a few years off. Really enjoyed chatting with you. You have a great day, and thanks for your time.
Thank you too. You too. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Please stop.
Lovely.